MOSAIC is now the deal, and it's 717 pages long. I don't know about you, but that's more than my nightlight can put up with. So I dispatched my good friend Pat Brown and said, Pat Brown, you read all those 1700. Geez. I said, Pat Brown. So I dispatched my good friend and partner Pat Brown and said, Pat, you read those 17. Jesus. Last try. So I dispatched my good friend and partner Pat Brown. I said, Pat, you read those 717 pages, report back to the viewers, and that way I can take a nap and no one will know. I hope you're well fed, well rested. This is going to be a little bit longer video than normal because we're talking about a topic that's potentially the most significant change to aircraft classifications in my career. I'm talking about MOSAIC. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's a pretty consequential change, Jamie. And let me just say, in terms of consequential, failing to hit like and subscribe could be a consequential mistake. And secondly, please excuse my voice because I've been fighting a sinus infection all week, and it has taken a toll on my vocal cords. So I apologize in advance if I sound like I'm croaking.
Well, I feel bad that I'm putting you through this then, but this is important stuff because these are major changes, and they don't just affect that small group, relatively small group of sport pilots. It could conceivably affect all of us, anyone who's a pilot. So let's start with the big one. What is MOSAIC? Why is it such a big deal?
Well, what it does is it dramatically expands the definition of light sport aircraft. And that's probably the biggest. Secondly, it expands the number of airplanes and the capabilities of airplanes that people that are flying under sport pilot rules can fly. I mean, and this is really a big, big deal. So it basically, and they're hoping that it will give some incentive to manufacturers to design some bigger, faster, heavier airplanes and things like that that they haven't been able to do in the past because they've been constrained by those rules.
Yeah, and getting away from that 1,320-pound weight limit could allow you to build in better crash worthiness on other aircraft. So there are some benefits. Now, what changes under MOSAIC? It pertains to sport pilots and people who, like you and I, who have commercials who might want to use sport pilot privileges, but it really does pertain dramatically to the aircraft itself. So what changes?
Well, you mentioned earlier about the 1,320-pound weight. That's gone. Light sport aircraft used to be limited to 120 knots. That's gone too. We'll get into airplanes that were certificated under LSA rules a little bit later in the video, but basically under the new rule, the weight limit is gone, the speed limit is gone.
And that's huge.
Yeah. And what they've done is they've replaced it with stall speeds, which just by definition is going to limit the weight of the airplane. So sport pilots now, people that carry sport pilot certificates, or those who choose to operate under sport pilot rules, even though they may hold a higher certificate, can fly airplanes with a clean, calibrated airspeed of 59 knots or less, of course. Mm-hmm. And that's huge because it used to be, I think an LSA was something like, if I remember right, at 44, 45 knots clean or something like that. Well, this is a major change in airplanes that someone with a sport pilot certificate or somebody that wants to operate as a sport pilot can fly much more capable airplanes.
So it affects pilots from the standpoint there's a wider array of aircraft available based on stall speed, not weight. How does MOSAIC affect aircraft itself that are classified as light sport aircraft? Well, how does that stall speed affect them?
Yeah, what they've done there, and I don't entirely understand what the reasoning is behind that, It may be buried somewhere in the 717 pages of that bill that I read, but I think around page 563, I begin to get cross-eyed. So it may be in there, but what they've done is they've now classified aircraft with a dirty calibrated airspeed of 61 knots, up to 61, up to and including 61 knots. Those airplanes can now be classified as light sport aircraft, which means that a manufacturer who may have something on the drawing board, but they can't get a better stall speed, better than 61 knots, dirty, in landing configuration. Well, that airplane now can qualify as a light sport aircraft. Now, unfortunately, if you and I, who both hold a commercial pilot certificate, and decide at some point that we want to operate with a driver's license medical under sport pilot privileges, we can't fly those airplanes that have a dirty stall speed of 61 knots or less, unless it's 59 knots or less. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm not real sure why they did that. Somebody smarter than maybe have figured it out, but I'm not sure why. But that is, regardless, it means that if you're operating under light sport rules, you can fly faster, heavier airplanes.
And this is a really good reason to keep watching this video. Don't click away, because we're going to get to when might we see those airplanes with the 61 knot stall speed a little later in this video. Yeah. Pat, you did read the 717 pages. You were at AirVenture for this announcement. You're the smart one. I think we have global confirmation of that. But you used the term calibrated airspeed, and right. Many pilots are used to looking at the little round gauge or the digital thing that's indicated airspeed. What's the difference?
Well, indicated airspeed can be somewhat inaccurate. So calibrated airspeed basically is the indicated airspeed corrected for instrument and position errors. It's just a more accurate way to express the airspeed on the airplane in I guess, a more universal way, if you want to think about it that way. It's that simple.
Awesome. Now, the FAA, Sean Duffy and the bigwigs at the FAA announced MOSAIC late July at AirVenture. It's now 1st of August as we tape this. This will go out live in a couple days. But when does MOSAIC actually take effect for the man and woman in the street who wants to get out to the airport and start acting under this rule? When does it actually become live?
Well, it was published in the Federal Register on July the 22nd. Most rules that are published in the Federal Register take effect 30 days later. This is an exception. It's 90 days. And that's because there's an enormous number of things that are affected by this rule. And again, keep watching, because we're going to talk about that as we get a little bit further into it. But once we start talking about that, you'll understand why the FAA really does need 90 days to make this happen. So October 22nd is the date.
Now, on October 22nd, or giving some grace, October 23rd, I'm a sport pilot. Can I start flying at night then?
Actually, with an endorsement and a third class medical or basic med, you can start flying at night. So it would have been nice if that had not been the case. But yes, sport pilots can now fly at night, but they've got to get the appropriate training. And unfortunately, they're going to have a third class medical or basic med. And as you know, Jamie, we've talked about this before. You can't just jump into basic med unless you have held a third class medical in the past. And I believe the date was July 14th, 2006, I think was the date.
Let's go with that. Sure. You know what? I'll look it up and I'll put it in the title at the bottom.
Yeah, I'm doing this from memory, but I think it was July 14th or 15th, 2006. If you've held a third class or better since that date, then you're eligible for basic med, or very likely eligible for basic med. So unfortunately, if you're a sport pilot, you're going to have to get a medical instead of being able to do it under a driver's license. But yes, you actually can fly at night under those circumstances. Yeah,
that's a big change right there, because up till this point, sport pilots have been barred from flying at night, as they've been barred from flying an aircraft. I can say big words.
Yes, you
with
can.
retractable landing gear, and a constant speed prop. Is that still off the table, or is that now something sport pilots can do?
Yeah, sport pilots are now going to be able to fly retractable gear airplanes, airplanes with constant speed props, basically complex airplanes. But with the appropriate endorsements, just like you currently have to have an endorsement to fly a retract or a high performance airplane, really. But yes, with the proper endorsements, a sport pilot now with a driver's license medical can fly complex airplanes or just simply airplanes with retractable gear or constant speed prop. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, now let's not talk about the wider world. Let's talk about me, because that's my favorite topic. As you know, I used to own an AirCam, a twin engine, tail dragger, experimental aircraft that was not covered by Sport Pilot because it was multi-engine. It had to be a single engine. Is that still going to be the case, or can I buy another AirCam and fly as a Sport Pilot now?
You could buy two air cams, Jamie. If I had your money, I'd burn mine. So yeah, actually, believe it or not, the new rule takes away a mention of how many engines. So a sport pilot can now fly a multi-engine airplane as long as it has a clean stall speed of 59 knots or less. So absolutely, if your air cam had a clean stall speed of 59 knots.
Oh, yeah. It's well below that. Now, speaking of, now this is the future. I can fly a multi-engine airplane as a sport pilot, which opens a lot of doors. I'm excited about that. How about the true future VTOLs, vertical takeoff and landing aircraft?
Right.
Those have never been included in sport pilot, but they are coming down the pike. Did the FAA accept that in this rule, or is that still off the table?
Now they did, as a matter of fact. This is a case of really forward thinking. There is verbiage in there now referring to simplified flight controls, which is essentially the kind of joystick that some of these eVTOLs that we see, or VTOLs that we see videos of. Basically, somebody sitting strapped in a chair, they got a joystick in front of them like a video controller. And so the FAA now calls these simplified flight controls, and there's specific verbiage in there allowing for the use of simplified flight controls in light sport aircraft. So yes, VTOLs or eVTOLs, as the case may be, are covered under this new rule. It's buried somewhere in 717 pages. I can't tell you the exact page, but it is there. Oh, and you know something? Speaking of 717 pages, as just a little bit of an aside, when you start digging into this, um, most of those pages are the FAA summarizing the comments that were made during the comment period and the FAA's response and reasoning behind why they adopted these various rules. That's why I said earlier, the difference between 59 knots and 61 knots, clean versus dirty, is probably in there. I probably missed it, but if somebody really wants to dig, they could probably put a comment in there. And here's the reason. And I'm sorry I missed it, but I did. But anyway, I digress.
It's okay. I'm 100% with you. Now, we've got a substantial number of sport pilots out there in the world, but we also have a substantial number of light sport aircraft, both legacy aircraft like the Cub, the T-Craft, the Champ, a lot of air coups, and we have newer kit built or factory built RV-12s, Zenith 701s, Legend Cubs. Are those affected in a way that anything changes for them, or are they still considered to be light sport aircraft?
Well, if an aircraft was, and I'll use the word certified, but if an aircraft was certified under the old rules, 1,320 pounds for a land plane, 1,430 for a seaplane, two seats, piston driven, non pressurized, all that stuff. They are and ever will be LSAs under the old rule of 1,320 pounds or 1,430, and all of the other things, 120 knots, flat
So
out.
they're
All,
grandfathered in then.
they're
They
grandfathered
exist.
to the old rule, and there's no way there's been nothing, um, there's no provisions to up the weight or the speed or anything else on airplanes that were built under the old light sport rules. So anything that was built, so let's talk about the rule has been published, right? We know it's going to take effect in October 22nd of 2025, right? But the way the rule is written is that anything that is built now between a year from when the rule was published is going to be subject to the old rules.
So any new designs we see, that's 61 knot stall speed dirty, that's going to be a year out from now. We're not going to see that till then because the certification isn't available to them. Is that right?
Yeah, because what has to happen is the ASTM people have to get together. They've got to write the consensus standards and all that. So, and they couldn't write the consensus standards until they had a rule to write the consensus standards too. And so I guess they're figuring that it'll take a year to get that done. So anybody that's currently building an LSAs, they're basically going to be stuck with the old specification, the 1,320 pounds, et cetera, until a year from when the notice was actually published. So we've got a year before we're actually going to see some of these newer, heavier, faster airplanes that are like new designs or updated designs of old LSA designs, maybe 4-seat versions of a Technam or something like that, let's say, that can be built under the LSA rule and certified as an LSA.
I will throw in, there is a method to increase the gross weight of an aircraft. It's not to be taken lightly. There's a process, but it's possible. I don't know, but it's possible a year from now, you'd be able to apply with your local FSDO to increase the weight of that 1,320 pound LSA based on the new rules. And you mentioned ASTM standards, which I think is important, that if I've got a normal category aircraft, that's going to be maintained under Part 43 of the FARs.
Correct.
But
that
if
doesn't
I've
change.
got a light sport kit built or factory built airplane, that's maintained under the manufacturer's standards done with the ASTM folks. So it's two completely different ways of doing maintenance, and it is worth understanding those are different standards entirely.
Yeah. So kind of to summarize, if an airplane is built today and wants to be classified as an LSA, it's the old rules. But a year from now, that same
October
airplane,
22nd, 2026.
yeah, a year from now, that airplane could then be certified as an LSA because the standards should have been written by that point.
Well, let's deal with the here and now. You own a Cessna 182, maybe the best general aviation airplane ever built. I used to own one. They're remarkable. Could I fly the 182 as a sport pilot? Does that now classify? Is that now in the light sport aircraft umbrella?
Yeah, as long as it has a calibrated stall speed of 61 knots or less, a 182 will be considered a light sport aircraft. But here's the kicker. You and I both have commercial pilot certificates. We're both instrument rated. We're both flight instructors. If tomorrow you and I decided I'm going to start flying under sport pilot rules, yes, I have a commercial pilot certificate, but I'm going to fly under sport pilot rules because I just don't want to mess with the medical anymore. I'm going to use my driver's license as my medical. As long as my 182 has a calibrated stalling speed clean of 59 knots or less, I can fly that for the rest of eternity. If it's a clean stall speed of 60 knots, unfortunately, I'm out of luck. So what the FAA has done is they have separated the qualifications of the aircraft and the qualifications of the pilot. So an aircraft with a dirty stall speed of 61 knots can be classified as an LSA. As a sport pilot, all we can do is fly an airplane with a clean calibrated airspeed of 59 knots or less under sport pilot rules. And again, I'm not sure why they did that, but that's the reality of it.
Now, up till this point, a recreational or private pilot has been on a third class medical or basic med. A commercial pilot or an ATP has been on a class 2 or a class 1 to perform their functions.
Yeah.
If a recreational or a private pilot or an ATP decides I want to fly as a sport pilot in a sport pilot compliant a light sport aircraft using my driver's license as a medical, can I do that?
Yeah. Yeah. You can fly an airplane.
That was the shortest answer you have ever given.
I'm trying, Jamie. You can fly any aircraft no matter what your level of certification is. You can fly a light sport aircraft under sport pilot rules with a driver's license medical, as long as after October 22nd, 2025, you're flying an airplane with a clean stall speed of 59 knots or less, period. You can fly at night as long as you're carrying a medical. A sport pilot can fly at night as long as you're carrying a medical. Now, the pilot that you referred to carries a rec or a private or a commercial or ATP, can, without further training and endorsements, can fly into Bravo, Charlie, and Delta airspace, whereas sport pilots still have to have endorsements to do that. The difference is now, once the rule takes effect October 22nd, with the proper training and endorsements, that same sport pilot can fly that 182 into Bravo, Charlie, and Delta. He or she will need the endorsements, but you and I, as commercial pilots flying under light sport rules, have already received that training, and no endorsements are necessary. We can fly into B, C, and D airspace all day long without any additional training.
This is what I find so exciting about this. This is not like the original light sport pilot thing that happened back in 2005.
Yeah.
This expands this dramatically, so it really does touch virtually any pilot that wants to be a part of the sport pilot thing, whether that's to get into aviation more affordably by having a shorter training period, or to stay in aviation longer because I no longer need a medical and I can fly a whole lot of airplanes I couldn't before. But let me ask you this. Like the tax code, whenever there's a change to the federal aviation regulations, it kind of flows into other things.
Yeah.
What does the MOSAIC rule touch on in other documents, testing processes, or whatever that we might want to be aware of? Because I'm fairly confident this change is going to have a trickle-down effect.
You think? So grab a cup of coffee. We're going to be here for a while. The reason we alluded to earlier in the video about the 90 days as opposed to the normal 30. Now, I've got a list here. I want to read it so that I'm not winging it, so to speak. These are the documents that are affected by the change in MOSAIC: the Airplane Flying Handbook, the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, also known as the PHAC, the Weight Shift Control Flying Handbook, the Powered Parachute Flying Handbook, the Weight and Balance Handbook. They've got to change some of the questions on the Sport Pilot Knowledge Test. There's a new test being prepared for a helicopter with simplified controls, i.e. VTOLs or eVTOLs. They've got to update the knowledge test matrix. And there are going to be new questions on the CFI knowledge test to reflect the recency and reinstatement changes. So that's not relating to light sport or MOSAIC per se, but it's part of the overall changes, because the other thing that was consequential was the getting rid of the expiration date on CFI certificates that happened a few months ago.
Sure. And I suspect, Pat, with things like the PHAC or the Airplane Flying Handbook or the Weight and Balance Handbook, we're not going to see an entirely new handbook published. We're going to see an addendum published that tags into those. That's fairly common. I don't think a lot of people know that, but you can go get those books free as PDFs from the FAA, and there'll be an addendum which literally just says this changed, this changed, this changed, and it makes it much easier to get up to speed without having to read that entire book.
Yeah. So some other kind of just miscellaneous fun stuff that, that I gleaned out of reading 717 pages of this book. 1,315 comments were received during the comment period. 11 were opposed to the rule. 1,304 were in support of it. Now, some supported it as is, some supported it with some changes, but the bottom line is net 1,300 to 11.
I'm betting we could name 5 or 6 of those 11 just off the top of our heads.
Oh, I guarantee you. I guarantee you. And one of those organizations has to do with flying the big iron. So, but I'm not going to mention them by name. The other thing that is interesting, and I think we can put this in the show notes if anybody really wants to see it. There are 15 tables that are in this document, and it's really those 15 tables that are the meat of all of these 700 plus pages. There's these 15 tables that enumerate what the change, what it was, and what it was proposed to be, and what the finished version is. And it's actually quite interesting reading. And so, Jamie, I think you can cut and paste that information I sent you into our show notes, because the pages within the 717 page document are listed on the information that we'll put in a show note. So you don't have to go looking for them. We've given you the pages, and you can go and you can read it yourself in case you have any questions, maybe something that we didn't explain either thoroughly or clearly enough, and you can go look at it yourself. As always, Jamie, and whenever the government's involved, the devil is in the details.
Yes, it is.
So, we'll have to see how all of this shakes out, because as one of my good friends at AOPA, Craig Brown, no relation, as Craig pointed out to me today when we were talking, he said there are some operating handbooks and airplane flying manuals that don't list a calibrated airspeed for the airplane. Uh-oh. How's that going to work? So, there's the devil's in the details, as we said, but overall, I got to tell you, Jamie, I'm incredibly excited about this change. I really am. It's hard to see any real downsides. Could it have been simpler with a single stall speed, clean or dirty for LSAs? Probably so. There's probably some reasoning behind it that I missed, but overall, to me, this is a major thumbs up.
I'm with you. This is a stunning change. It was worth waiting for. I know it took a long time, but this is going to affect every pilot that wants to stay in flying or get in cheaper. It's going to affect every manufacturer that wants to build something a little more robust than they've been building, but being aware there really is a market for it. And it's even going to do something for the resale market, because if you've got a 150, 152, a PA 28, 140, a 172, all sorts of things, those are now going to be available to a pool of people who were out of the game before. So this is huge. I'm very excited. Pat, thank you so much for doing all the homework. Let's let the folks back home just kind of digest this for a minute, because they've got a few weeks. October 22nd is a little ways off, but this is the new way of the world, folks. So get used to it. Learn to love it. It's going to be awesome.
I'm going to leave you one additional thought, those that are watching. You can thank AOPA and the Experimental Aircraft Association and a few other organizations for pushing this through. So if you're not an AOPA member and you wonder what your or EAA for that matter, and you're wondering what your organizations do for pilots, and if it warrants your $89 a year for AOPA, I don't remember what EAA is. This is a really good example of that. So I'm going to shame you into joining both of these organizations, because they work tirelessly to push this kind of stuff through. And in this case, it's a big win for General Aviation. So I'm getting off my soapbox now.
Well, I'm going to give you some cover. And the reason my friend Mr. Brown doesn't know what it costs for an EAA membership is because we're both life members of those organizations. So we prepaid a while back. We don't do the annual thing. But Pat, with this rosy outlook and all this great news, how about I get back with you here next week and we talk again about some equally spectacular topic that the viewers really want to know about? And yeah, that's it. I'm good.
All right, my friend. Adios.